Heredity and evolution. So here this heredity and evolution, it is linked up with the previous lesson where we have learnt about the sexual reproduction in organisms and asexual reproduction. So in that reproduction, we learnt about the reason for evolution. So evolution is a gradual process which made the diversity possible on this planet. How many species are there? So there are thousands and thousands and thousands, millions of species are there on this planet. The scientists, they haven't yet identified the whole number of species, whole varieties of species that are present on this planet. Still they are finding some new species every day. So how this much of diversity has come onto this planet? And moreover, we learned one more thing in the reproduction. The traits or the characters are passed from generation to generation. And we learned that when there is reproduction, the young ones that are born are identical to the parent. They are similar to the parent, but they are not exactly identical. Young ones are similar to the parent, but they are not exactly identical. They have some changes. We call them as variations. So here, what is the link to these variations, to this heredity and evolution? This lesson tells us these variations, that means the changes that are happened during the copying of DNA, during the process of reproduction, these changes, they are inherited from generation to generation. This is called as heredity. So these variations and the heredity, they help in the process of evolution. This is what we are going to learn in this chapter, Heredity and Evolution. So variations takes place in each generation, from generation to generation. But there is some difference. If you see the asexual reproduction, asexual reproduction, the variations are less. If it is sexual reproduction, that means if the organism reproduces by sexual means, there is more chance for variation because two DNAs, mother DNA, father DNA, recombine to form a new DNA. So there are more chances, that means more variations. More variations in case of sexual reproduction, less variations in case of asexual reproduction. But whatever may be the case, asexual or sexual, variations are there in each generation, one progeny to another progeny. So now let us see how these variations lead to that concept of evolution. Let us see now. So let us see, already we discussed in the previous lesson about the variations. The variations sometimes may be advantageous. It doesn't mean that all variations are advantageous. So variations takes place, sometimes they become advantageous. Say, here we can take an example, there is a bacteria. So this bacteria, it lives at a temperature of 20 degrees, it can withstand up to 20 degrees. So some variation happened in this bacteria, in this population. So in the progenies, in the next generations, some bacteria are still able to withstand only 20, but in some bacteria, in the same species, the generations, in the next coming up generations, in one of the generation, there is a variation that the bacteria can withstand 30 degrees or 40 degrees. So this is a variant. Both are of same species. But while copying of DNA, some errors might have occurred, and which led to a variation in which this bacteria is able to withstand a temperature of 40 degrees or more. And other members, those who do not have that variations, they can withstand only up to 20 degrees Celsius. So if the environmental conditions change to high temperature, so the environment now it is having more than 30 degrees, 40 degrees Celsius, the temperature in the environment is changed. Now this variation, that is increasing the withstanding capacity of heat. So that variation, it becomes advantageous for this organism. So there may be natural changes in the environment. The organisms which have variations that help them to adapt in that particular changed environment, such cases you can say it is advantageous. Basically this is called as natural selection. So we see every day many species are becoming extinct, but some species are surviving. It is because of the variations fetching them. So the organisms that have the variations that fetch them, that help them to live in the changing environmental conditions, so such cases the variations are advantageous. So here we are learning mechanisms by which variations are inherited. Variations are inherited. By what mechanisms the variations are inherited? To understand that, we need to know the rules of heredity. So rules of heredity, what are these rules? Who found these rules? So there was a person called Gregor John Mendel. He conducted experiments on the organisms, how these variations are inherited. So to understand or to see how the variations are inherited, you need to observe number of generations. If you take any organism as your case study example, as your specimen example, if you wanted to study how the variations are inherited in humans, for your study you need to see some 10 generations, but it is not possible in your lifetime. You cannot see 10 generations in your sample study organism. So Mendel, he wanted to study the changes that happen in generation to generation. So he selected a plant which is having a very little lifespan, so by that he can observe its progenies, number of generations, how the traits are inherited. So for that reason he selected a pea plant which is having some contrast characters. That means the characters that can be seen to the naked eye. For that reason he selected pea plants. He conducted experiments on pea plants. And if we study the observations of Gregor John Mendel, we can understand how the characters, how the variations are inherited from generation to generation and how they leads to that evolution. So that part, again, the contribution of another scientist, Charles Darwin. So he made certain observations. We'll study in the second part of this lesson, that will tell us about the process of evolution. Here we will understand how the traits are inherited and what are the rules of the heredity, that we can understand here. Let us see.